Tanner O'Brien. I am a senior partner here at Action Coach in Central Texas, and today we're talking a little bit about economic slowdowns and recessions. Kind of what are the causes of this, and as a business owner, how can I be prepared? What are the things I can do to ensure that my business stays afloat during the uncertain times? So before we kind of dive into some of these areas here, we need to kind of take a step back and say, what is a recession? What causes it? Is it something that we should be frightened of? Well, the honest reality is, regardless of if it's officially true or not by the true definition of slowdown in GDP for a recession, there's clearly some economic challenges that are upcoming for our economy here in the United States and potentially even globally. This is not necessarily something to be afraid of. We need to understand that economic slowdowns, economic pullbacks, recessions, things like this are really just a part of the economic system. This happens on average every 7 to 10 years. Now, if we look back over the last number of years, we've had a few blips with this whole COVID pandemic, but we really haven't had a massive slowdown or recession since about 2007, 2008 with the real estate or mortgage crisis. So when we look at that kind of time frame and understanding that really economic slowdowns and this cycle of our economic system does fall into this on average every 7 to 10 years, we're right in a spot where we should be prepared for that as a business. Now, it's important to understand that when it comes to the seasons of the economy, and that's kind of the way that I encourage you to look at it. It's really understanding what are the seasons of our economy and how does this work. So we, at the top of the economic boom, everything is growing, everything is moving in a positive direction. This is ultimately economic summer. Everything is going really, really well. And then finally, we kind of hit that tipping point. We move into economic fall, because fall always follows summer in the seasons. So when we move into economic fall, we're starting to see increase in interest rates. We're starting to see slowdown of lending. We're starting to see stock market start to go down a little bit rather than that continued boom. We're starting to see commodities start to fall, and then eventually we start to move from fall into winter. And that's where we kind of see what the recession actually is. We see a pullback all the way across the board with stock prices, with commodities starting to go down. Eventually, we start to see real estate prices start to fall, things like that. This is a part of the process. Once we get beyond that, there is a recovery. We start to move into economic spring, and things start to come back on the forefront. And eventually, of course, back into economic summer. We need to understand that this is a cycle that happens, again, on average every 7 to 10 years. Sometimes it's a little bit longer, sometimes it's a little bit less. But if you look on a long enough timeline, on average, it's about every 7 to 10 years. We see this full cycle come full circle. So what causes recession? Now, there's a number of different triggers that can ultimately kind of move us into that recessionary trend. But at the end of the day, it's really when demand peaks and starts to decline. We start seeing businesses that have an excessive supply of goods and services that just aren't being consumed anymore. Because of that, we start to see a pullback of those resources being put into production. So we can even see layoffs at that point in time, which ultimately just kind of compounds against this lack of spending power that the consumer starts to feel. So how can this affect your business? As a business owner, understanding that this economic slowdown, or what could be considered a recession, is likely to take place over the next year, 18 months or so. How can it affect your business? What can we expect as business owners? Well, there's a number of ways that it can, but one of the biggest things that we can start to plan for and understand are things like lower spending by consumers. When we move into this type of an environment, people tend to feel and oftentimes actually have less money. They feel less wealthy, less rich. They feel as if they need to tighten up their spending. They start putting more money away in savings. They have less spending on other areas. So because of that, your business may see a lower amount of sales. Instead of seeing year over year growth, things like that, without any intervention, you may see some decline in sales, and being prepared for that. Now, because of that, of course, profits decrease. It becomes a little bit easier to look for ways to cut costs. This is where we can start seeing things like decrease in our labor force. We start to cut some costs with team members. We start looking for other ways that we can cut down to ensure that we still have profitability in our business. These are things that can affect the business long term. So we see some firings, we see some layoffs, especially in global recessions. When we look at how this can really impact our businesses. In global recessions, supply chains and logistics may also be disrupted during this time frame. Now, we saw a lot of that, while not technically a recession by the textbook definition. There was some disruption in the COVID pandemic when it came to supply chain, and that definitely has a downstream impact on many businesses, whether it's you directly as the business or your suppliers, where you get some of your goods and services, or who you do business with on a regular basis. All of that has an impact in your business. So what are 3 ways that we can look to stay afloat? What can we do to be prepared and plan for the fact that these things happen? Whether we move into this as a true issue over the next 18 months or so, or we see a little bit of a pickup, but we know that these things happen on a regular basis. So being in business, a part of that is making sure that we're planning and preparing for anything that can come up, and understanding where we are as an economy in that economic cycle. So kind of 3 main ways to stay afloat. Number 1 is cash up. Do as much as possible to ensure that profits and cash flow are as healthy as possible. Going back to that fundamentals, putting money back into the bank, rather than continued investment back into the business or spending. We need to ensure that we have cash in the bank. When we go back to COVID as an example, we go back the last couple years with COVID, and we look at the businesses that fared the best, especially the ones that we worked with here at Action Coach. Those that had 6, 7, 8 months of reserves in the bank account fared much better than any other business that we had worked with. Why? Because they prepared. They had a healthy business that had cash flow, they had profits, and they actually put money into the bank on a consistent basis so they could weather the storm. They knew that there was going to be some things, well, in that particular case, did not know that it was coming, but was able to weather the storm in that case. There was the preparation of putting money in the bank account. And that is something that you can start doing today in your business, is really focus on the fundamentals of profits, of cash flow, and putting money into the bank and having that reserves there, just like you would if you were an individual preparing to save and understanding that income may be a little bit tighter in these types of times. How do we prepare for that? Well, we put some money away. We make sure that it's saved and ready to go in the event that we need it. So number 1 is cash up, and that does take a little bit of planning. That's why business planning is so important, not just on a 5-year, 10-year planning cycle, but understanding what is your annual plan for next year. What is the budget? How are the numbers actually going to look in your business next year, so that you can prepare and plan for these types of things. It comes back down to quarterly planning, ensuring that this is reviewed and looked at every single quarter. This planning piece, so critical when it comes to ensuring that we've got the fundamentals of our business healthy. Second of the 3 ways here to stay afloat or prepare for a recession or an economic slowdown is pivot. Pivot and look for opportunity. So there is, I go back again to COVID as an example. While maybe not an official recession, there was definitely a shortened period of time where there was an economic slowdown for many industries. So I look at this, and what were some of the best things that some businesses did? They pivoted. They looked at other areas, other ways that they could change their product line or their service line in order to capitalize on some things that were taking place during that time. So I think of all the businesses that transitioned to producing and selling hand sanitizer when that was not their core business beforehand. And there's a number of other examples out there on ways that businesses pivoted during that time, but being able to adjust and shift and pivot in ways that we can lean into areas that are going to work well during these times. Being stagnant, doing the same thing over and over again, simply is not going to work. unless you've got a massive war chest of money sitting out there that can get you through the next 2-3 years without bringing in as many sales. So it's important to pivot. It's also important to look for opportunity. When we look at an economic pullback, just because the economy is slowing down or we see a bit of a recession does not mean that every industry and every product focus is going to slow down and break apart at that time. There are defensive areas. So we think of, let's just take consumer goods as an example. May there be will consumers buy less of extravagant things? Will they buy less of luxury vehicles, or maybe they'll take a little bit longer to upgrade their iPhone or something like that because spending is a little bit tighter. Those behaviors tend to change. Now, other areas like food, like toiletries, like household items that you have to have regardless of what's going on. People still need food, water, shelter, things like that, right? So when we look at that, there are areas that are going to continue to do well regardless of the fact that there is a bit of a pullback in the economy. This goes into energy, into fuel, things like that. People are still going to need to get around. They're still going to need to heat their homes. There's still going to be a lot of times and areas where there is opportunity. The last piece of opportunity before I kind of move on to the third piece of how to stay afloat is when you're in a position, you've prepared well enough for this type of an environment, knowing that there is going to be a slowdown. High growth companies are going to need to look at how they can be fundamentally strong to be value companies. But what's really exciting is when you're prepared, there is a tremendous amount of opportunity to take advantage of other business options. So what do I mean by this? I mean by this is when you look at your competitors, if you're in the, what's a good example? Pick an industry, just first industry that comes to your mind or your particular industry, and think about all the competitors that you have out there in the marketplace that you're competing with, consistently day in and day out for business. When we move into an economic slowdown, not every business is going to survive. It's the unfortunate truth of how these cycles work. There are businesses that are better prepared than others. And if you're a business that's better prepared and your competitor is not, there's an opportunity to take over that business, to take over their client base, to take over actually buy them out in some cases. You may have some businesses that were once looking to sell their business or would have sold their business for $1 million. And because there's pressure, because things have started to fall apart, because the owner themselves actually needs the money out of the business so that they can live and survive and continue to take care of their family, they may take less for their business than they would have beforehand. In other words, you may get a tremendous deal to take over another business and be able to add that into your portfolio or take over their client base and continue to sell to them and ultimately bolster up your business in that environment. So when you take a look at this, there's a lot of opportunity, which brings me to point number 3 on the 3 ways to kind of stay afloat during a recessionary or an economic pullback, and that is mindset. Keep a positive, optimistic mindset, understanding this is not something to be fearful of, but understanding how the economy works, how the economic cycles work, and look for opportunities. When you've got the mindset walking in of this is going to be an exciting time because I've prepared, I've planned, I continue to do what's right by the fundamentals of my business, to have profits, to have cash flow, to have money in the bank so that I can invest and I can take over tremendous opportunities that are going to create amazing business and wealth and success for me, my team, my family, everything as we take on new opportunities and move forward. This is an exciting time. You don't want to be buying a whole bunch of businesses and take on these opportunities when you're at the top of that economic boom. Things are highly valued at that point. But when things start to come down, this is the time when you get the opportunity to buy low and maybe eventually sell high one day, that sort of thing. So there is opportunity. I keep going back to that, but when we can change our own mindset on what that looks like, what that feels like, and how we approach it, that's going to lead to success in these types of environments. So there's an importance in staying ahead. Profits, cash flow, putting money in the bank is critical. This takes planning. This takes annual planning, this takes quarterly planning, this takes sitting down with your executive team, your owner team, whoever it is that is a part of your official or unofficial board of directors for your business, and looking at how do we plan and prepare for next year? How do we have the fundamentals as solid as possible so we know we can properly project and pivot where necessary on sales, on our expenses? What can we look at? How can we ensure that these are taken care of on a month-by-month basis in a way that is correct for our business? Planning will be critical. So here at Action Coach in Central Texas on December 1st and 2nd, we will be running our annual planning conference. We do this once a year, every year, 2 days. First day of learning with some breakout sessions, having some phenomenal speakers for you to come and learn and experience and gather some ideas for how you're going to implement and grow your business in 2023. Day 2, December 2nd, which is a Friday, that will be an entire day of annual planning, where we will take you through this process of building your objectives, your key results for 2023. We will take you through your budget building and your forecasting. What do the numbers actually look like? How do we ensure that we actually have profits and positive cash flow at the end of every month that's going to put money in our bank accounts and keep us afloat during this time frame where there may be a bit of an economic pullback? We're going to ensure that you walk away with a true built-out annual plan for 2023. Dedicate that time. So I will drop the link to the event in the description below, but I encourage you, go check that out. Join us for December 1st and 2nd for annual planning at GrowthX 2022, so we build your plan for 2023 and help you build a business that is recession-proof, that is economic slowdown proof. You're going to be successful, your business is going to be successful, and it's going to be an amazing time for opportunity in 2023. My name is Dan O'Brien. I'm a senior partner here at Action Coach in Central Texas. It's my pleasure today to share this information with you.